welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Abbie Reese, author of Dedicated to God, an oral history of cloistered nuns, published by Oxford University Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. And welcome, Abbie, to EWTN's Bookmark.
It's
great to have you here.
Thank you.
Some of our audience will remember you were back on with the Friars on Life on the Rock back last summer, and a wonderful documentary called Chosen, right?
Chosen, Custody of the Eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you worked on that as well as a subset of the book, or which came first?
The book came first. The idea for the film, although I didn't know what kind of shape it was going to take, came first. Mm-hmm. The original impetus was that I wanted to follow the journey of a young woman mm-hmm. considering cloistered life, and then walk with her as she was joining the monastery. When I met the mother abbess and told her that I was interested in a long-term project mm-hmm. to conduct interviews and to make photos, they were so receptive that I was so on board with interviewing them. And I could not have made the film without interviewing the nuns and understanding the life.
And you did the interviews over a period of about 6 years, right?
About 6 years.
Okay, and while you were doing the interview, were you compiling the book at the same time, or just compiling the interviews and then working on it once you had all the interviews you thought you needed?
I was transcribing the interviews as I went along, making notes of where, what needed to be filled in, what I needed to ask more of. But I didn't start writing it until I had all of what I thought were the interviews that needed to be done finished.
Now, when he says an oral history of cloistered nuns, there's a lot of cloistered nuns around the world. This isn't an oral history of all of them. This is a specific group of what, Poor Clares?
Poor Clare Colettines, and in one community.
Mm-hmm. And where is that located?
Rockford, Illinois, just an hour west of
Chicago.
Chicago.
And why did you pick them?
Because they were actually near where I grew up, mm-hmm. and I didn't know about them. I learned about them when I was starting to look around for a community that would let me interview the nuns, and they said yes. So they were the ones that I stayed with.
Right.
Yeah.
I know we're showing some images of what it looks like, and you have pictures in the book. And it was interesting when I started reading this book, I realized I had been at this particular monastery back in the late 90s when we did a series with the late Bishop Doran on a book he had authored called At the Crossroads. And I had the opportunity to visit with some of the sisters through the grill, which we just showed a picture of at the same time. So it was kind of interesting to read your impressions, because obviously you had a much more in-depth experience with the sisters than I did. And it's great to see that they're still thriving.
Yeah, they are thriving. But that grill is kind of a stark visual when you first see it. Did it make an impression on you when you first?
Yeah, it did, because obviously Mother Angelica and her Poor Clares were cloistered as well, but the parlor, or the grill parlor, was bigger. Maybe just because of the nature of Mother Angelica and things like that, and the number of people who might come to see or visit with her. But I was taken aback by how small it actually was when I was there. And maybe that was just because I had seen the one that had been here, and then obviously the one that's in Hanceville at the monastery.
Sure.
So it was a little different.
Sure. So one of the nuns, she tells the story of her great niece. The little girl's mom said, "Kaylee, we're going to go to the monastery. Mm-hmm. We're going to go see Great Aunt Mary." And the little girl said, "Oh, the one in the cage." And the mom was horrified. And the girl said, "The Jesus cage." Well, the nuns love that story, because to see it for the first time from a children's perspective is so... Right. It does look like...
And it's interesting, too, because they laughed about that, and they talked about the idea that people see it as somehow they're hiding away from the world in this cage, but that's not the case at all, right?
Exactly. They see it as like we're keeping a boundary with the world. We are. This is the extent to which we want the world to come in. And so they, for example, learn things like how to repair the boiler, how to clean the boiler, going inside of the boiler, because they don't even want the workmen to have to come in. They want to maintain that sacred distance and sacred space.
Right. So what's interesting in your book as you go through the idea of an oral history, what makes something an oral history, and why did you decide to do it that way?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So an oral history is kind of a methodology, or as a practice, is really collaborative, and there's this idea of co-authorship and shared authority, which is so very different. I had worked as a journalist before coming to oral history, and I loved this idea that if nuns who are hidden from the world and are giving such trust to share their stories, oral history would be the way to do it, because they share the authority. At the end of the day, if they share a story that's too private and they don't want in, even though their names are not, their real names aren't used.
Right, even with the pictures, there's no names in the book. Right?
Exactly. And even the religious names are aliases that they chose.
Right.
That they could say, I really don't want this in, and I wouldn't. I would respect that.
Now, you said, I was drawn to the Cloistered monastery as something of a cultural time capsule, in part because the nuns do not need to be seen. What do you mean?
Well, I just think that so many people today want to be seen, and I guess it's a little bit ironic because I'm sitting here on a camera right now being seen, but I find it really compelling that there are people today who don't need that, who don't need to be known, who don't need to be seen. Their whole life is withdrawing like Jesus into the wilderness and living their lives authentically, them and God. You know, even custody of the eyes, it's like keeping their eyes to themselves. Like Jesus said, if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out. You know, like they, in here, there's a description. Do you want me to share a little bit of the custody of the eyes practice?
Yeah, sure.
It's so fascinating. Be modest and reserved in regard to your eyes, especially in the choir, chapter, refectory, novitiate, and wherever the community is assembled. Do not look up without good reason for so doing. And it goes on. There's 7 different.
Right, exactly.
Just keeping their own eyes.
So when you actually interacted with them, did you find that they actually lived that out? Because one of the things you mentioned is the idea of even when they have visitations from relatives through the grill, they're not really supposed to touch one another.
Yeah. So the touch, they wouldn't reach through the grill, they wouldn't touch, but they would look me in the eyes and they would engage like normally. I mean, and I think that they would describe it as almost like a charity. Most of the time, it's like a sacrifice that they are giving up. They're doing it this way, but it's a charity to not like, you know, look down like this when I'm talking to them.
Right, exactly, right.
But it is interesting. One of the nun who is now the Mother Abbess, she described how when she's walking down the hall, she's kind of looking down, but when she sees her sister coming, she'll kind of look up and nod, and she'll nod twice. One to her sister, and once to her sister's guardian angel, which I think is so lovely. It's just this like recognition. We're in the same space.
The other thing you say that you expected more uniformity of belief than I encountered. When you say belief, are you talking about Catholic teaching or what? What do you mean uniformity of belief?
That's such a good question. It's I think that I was expecting that in order to be in this community, they would all say, kind of wrote, this is exactly what you're supposed to believe, not as far as like the basics, but as far as like, for example, talking to one of the nuns, she's like sharing some kind of personal experiences that have influenced her faith and religious walk that I wouldn't encounter with somebody else. They would have a little more, you know, maybe nuance or just, but there was quite a wide range of perspectives, and also because some of them entered before Vatican II, and so it's
right. Even the people coming in and the sisters coming in later, and you recount one of the sisters who's waiting to get voted on, right? To continue on, and whether she's going to get there or not, and even I think the mother talking about having young women come to inquire and saying, well, can I bring my cell phone and can I bring my laptop, etc.
Yeah, just such coming from, it's such a time capsule in that respect of like founded in 1212 and adhering to some of the same ways of life as were going on in the medieval era, but kind of run by an older generation now. So when younger ones come in, it's kind of like the new ways are kind of jarring in some respects. So for example, one of the nuns described coming in, I think in the 60s, and the last nun who came in and stayed had been at least a decade. And so as she was describing the 60s and like the presents that she got, it was so different to the nuns who had been there for a couple decades and who grew up in the Depression.
Right.
And they were like, you got how many presents? What's going on?
Right, right. So in a way, an insight into what was going on outside. I began this project with a question: what compels a woman in this era of overexposure at a time with the technological means to reach the global audience, as we just were talking about, to make a drastic, lifelong countercultural decision for her life in favor of obscurity? Do you have an answer for that?
I think it's her calling. I do. I think that as different as their stories are, they all say, I've been called. And they would say, this is a hard, hard life. No one could just do it if they don't have some sort of grace from God to live it out.
Now, you said cloistered monastic nuns meditate on behalf of humanity, believing that their prayers and penances can change the course of history. You also make the point that you're not Catholic. So when they said that to you, what did you think of that?
I thought of all the studies I've heard, that like prayer not only changes our internal makeup, our biology, but it centers people. It changes, like, people who meditate, people who pray, their brains become wired differently. Like, things do change when you pray and when you have faith. And it might change oneself, and it often changes the people around you. I believe that.
Now, you yourself, maybe this is a better question at the end of the interview, but in going through from the time you started and the 6 years you spent, and how did interacting with them change you and your spiritual life? Well,
I'm someone who wishes that I was more confident and wishes that I understood more. I'm someone who has so many unanswered questions, but I'm drawn to their conviction. I'm amazed by their concession that they'll say, we do not know how this is going to end. We do not know what our lives are producing. We will at the end. We will when we die. But I'm so amazed by that. I wish that I could say, I know this.
Right, that I have that level of certainty that I think I see in the sisters, which is really a function of their faith. You talk about, and I thought this was interesting, the idea that oral history features a multiplicity of identities, and that's probably what you were talking about, the lack of uniformity, the different perspectives the different sisters have. And you have how many different sisters that you actually feature their stories in the book?
In the book, oh my goodness, this is a good question. This is a hard question because I've been so focused on the film, making the film. How many are in the book? I think I interviewed, in the very back of the book, it lists their names.
Right, exactly.
Maybe I interviewed 10 or 11.
Okay.
And a few of them that I interviewed aren't in the book.
Right. Were there any who said they would rather not be interviewed?
Oh, absolutely. So there's like roughly, usually about 20 nuns, and I think about half said absolutely.
Was that a function of age? Did you find some of the older nuns were less likely to want to talk, or was there any correlation either way? Across the board?
Across the board. The one who had been in there the longest, eldest by rank, she was eager to be interviewed. She's the one who said, I don't think I ever adjusted to the life. Right,
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
That comment she made, in a sense of that continuing adjustment.
Totally.
right? Which is kind of a Catholic perspective that says we're never fully there. We're always striving to get there.
That's beautiful.
Right.
That's exactly it.
And that kind of a thing. So it was interesting for her to say that. Now, the nuns refer to themselves as mothers of souls. And you say, well, that's counterintuitive as it might be, because you also talk about the idea, and you have some of the stories where clearly you've got women who see them as mothers who have given up being a physical mother.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, and how, like, the life, even though they don't have they don't have children, they don't have a family, they are fulfilled as mothers of souls, knowing that they're praying for people on the other side of the world and ushering souls towards eternity.
Right. Now, you talk about the fact of your impression with them and how different they were. They also, you also mentioned the nuns would greet me for the first time and say that they heard I was not what one expects of a journalist or a reporter or interviewer. What do you think they meant?
I think that one of the reasons why they let me interview them is that because I was using an oral history approach, and I wasn't saying, okay, answer this question. What do you mean by that? You know, and so they were kind of excited to just not be kind of put on the spot, like, I mean,
you were going to grill them or something, through the grill, so to speak. Right.
Like I would have done if, you know, like 5 years earlier.
Right, if you were there as a newspaper reporter, or there was a story you were trying to get to, or an angle you were looking for. In the introduction, you talk about Sister Sarah Marie, whom I have come to know as direct and self-deprecating. Italian is the word she thinks best captures her personality. Wants me to study one of the photos and note the difference between her small nose in the picture with her big nose for now. And it was interesting because you said the fact is Sister Sarah Marie was normal and quite average. And in a sense, you were saying how many of sisters wanted you to see they were normal before they came in. It's not that they were some, you know, person on the periphery or some strange person who suddenly decided to run and hide in a monastery, right?
Exactly. They, you know, it's not like they couldn't function in society. And it was so important for her to show me that she knew how to contour her nose with makeup. Right. Like, she had skills.
Right. Did her nose look smaller in the old picture?
Did.
Oh, okay.
It did.
and was she the one, who was the one who wanted to be a cowboy?
Oh, that was one of the older nuns. That wasn't Sister Sarah Marie. That was, I wish I could remember off the top of my head.
Now, you also talk about, you expect most women that would come here are introverted, withdrawn. Maybe somebody should interview us that is majoring in abnormal psychology. But you have to be normal to live this life, Abbie. You have to be real normal. This is what Sister Sarah Marie said. And she goes on to say, you know, it's not easy, 20 women living together. It's not easy for 20 people anyway. But in an environment like that, that's what, 14 acres or so?
22, I think, oh no, 14.
About 14 acres or so?
Yeah.
You know, and you're there.
Right, you're there.
and you're interacting. And again, they vote on each one coming in, but obviously, you know, I'm sure like everything else in life, people have their likes and dislikes, and people who, you know, irritate one another more than they wish they did, like most situations where there are marriages or other relationships, right?
Yeah, and totally, you know, normal disagreements, normal frictions and tensions, but bearing in mind that the new ones who come in live in a separate wing, so the professed nuns who are voting aren't voting on like character, or they're not voting on like qualities that would like rub them wrong.
Right,
you know?
I got you. Okay.
They're
so the novitiate is kept separate.
Totally separate,
Okay.
and then
And what is it? 6 years really to come? How many years?
now, as of either one, I'm getting lost for time, but Pope Francis, the Vatican put out a new constitution for cloistered nuns. So it was 6, now it's 9.
Okay.
9 years.
Trying to make sure that
formation.
people are really committed when what they're getting into. You talk about something called nostalgia of the heart. Do you remember what she was talking about? It says, Poor Clare postulants, they enter the Corpus Christi as part of their formation. Cloistered contemplative yearns for fulfillment in God and an uninterrupted nostalgia of the heart. I just thought that was a very powerful expression. I just wasn't quite sure what exactly
That's a beautiful
that
phrase.
was.
Who was saying that?
It was actually a statement for the church. It was probably why.
Oh,
The document.
the Verbi.
Right, instruction on contemplative life and the closure of nuns. I wonder if any of the
Yes.
nuns had reflected on what that was, but also was interesting too, because obviously Poor Clare Nuns as Mother Angelica Sisters, Eucharistic adoration is central to EWTN's success, we'll say, and certainly the nuns. But they don't have perpetual adoration because they don't have enough sisters. Is that what it is?
They do have perpetual.
Oh, they do. Okay, because
Yeah.
originally here it said, Blessed Sacrament is not exposed perpetually 24 hours a day. That would require constantships, one member of the community.
So
Did they adapt? They change that or something?
I think that it's generally out, but they don't like formally have
I
perpetual
see.
adoration,
Okay.
although they kind of observe it.
Right.
There's
There's a nun there, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
They try to have a nun there
all the time,
but
'cause you-
because they don't always, it's not officially.
officially,
Yeah.
okay. Now I think one of the things people don't always realize, the nuns make altar breads. They got a little tiny gift shop, which I'm sure they don't make a lot of money with, but they really do rely on the goodwill of others, right?
Absolutely. And they would, say to me, this isn't a gift shop. This is just more or less like a service to the community. They don't make much money. They survive on donations. People bring them fresh fish,
Right.
vegetables, bring them their groceries. The tiny little area that we might think looks like a gift shop, it has like communion veils, baptism outfits, things that the nuns make,
Right.
beautiful cards
Right.
with flowers pressed that they have grown on the enclosure,
wow, okay.
or rosaries. This is one
So
of
unique items, really.
unique. Job's tears, the seed, they grow it in their property. It's these huge stalks, and the seed naturally has a hole in it, and so they use that to thread to make rosaries.
To make rosaries, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too. You also say each follows her convictions at an incredible personal cost to become a sister. Even so, you say some families were so adamantly against monastic life, which appeared so restricted to them, that they ended all contact after their daughter or sister became a Poor Clare.
It's incredible. I mean, I think that, for a lot of families, I think that it can feel like a personal rejection, not like they're going to a monastery because they believe they're called, because they want to live this life, but because, they feel, I think sometimes like they were married, they had kids,
What's wrong?
what's wrong with
Did we do
what you
something
saw?
wrong that
Yeah.
you would think that this kind of life we're having isn't enough for you?
Exactly.
Or there's a problem with it, maybe.
The kind of life and us. Like,
Right.
why don't you want to see me anymore?
Right. Now, I thought it was interesting. Who was one sister who was part of an active order. First, she was a gym teacher and things like that, and then she decided, I guess, to opt for the monastic life.
Yeah, a number of them in Rockford started in active religious communities and then transferred to the Corpus Christi Monastery.
Right. It says, in one of the paradoxes of this life, they believe that in removing themselves from the world and embracing a life of anonymity, unseen and unknown to the world at large, by undertaking lives of self-sacrifice and prayer behind the scenes, they have a greater impact on mankind than if they maintain direct contact with strangers and loved ones.
Yeah, yeah. That idea of prayer and penance,
Right.
that their sacrifices, their vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and enclosure, the penance of not touching their loved one, that asking God to then console somebody else because they're giving up this like
Right.
lovely thing, It's not like they don't want to touch their loved one, but they're giving it up.
It's a sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice.
And it's that old idea of redemptive suffering and offering up as for other people's benefits. And that's what the sisters do. That's certainly what we think of our sisters.
Yeah.
And we think them in relation as our sisters. Let's talk in just closing moments about the documentary that we've aired on EWTN and how that came about and how much work was that compared to putting the book together.
Oh, I think that making a film is like 100 times harder than sitting down and writing and revising. the idea was to follow the journey of a young woman. So I met her in 2005, the same time that I met the nuns that I interviewed for the book, and interviewed her for 6 years as she was contemplating religious life. And then she joined in 2011. And then I kept filming kind of from the outside, filmed ceremonies and her entering. And then I thought, let's extend that idea of collaboration. Will she take the video camera? Would the superiors let me lend her a video camera? And could she then document her journey, not knowing if she had video camera cinematography skills, because she'd been a painter and a blogger.
So she had some artistic
She
sense.
did,
Okay.
yeah, and a visual
And technology,
sensibility.
right.
Technology. So the superiors were open to it, and then she was interested, and I was totally blown away by, I asked her to record video diaries or video letters. She shares these intimate parts of her journey, the struggles, like as she's adapting to the life. So the film is basically that kind of in-between period of her having entered, with some like flashback audio before she joined, before she joined, through to a few years in.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your fine work. Thanks for that documentary. We're happy to air on EWTN. Thank you for the book, Dedicated to God, an Oral History of Cloistered Nuns. Thank you, Abbie Reese. Pleasure to meet you. And available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, the place for all things Catholic, and for this book as well. Check it out, and check us out next time on EWTN's Bookmark. Thanks.